Hello, and a big welcome to all of you out there who are listening and watching this podcast. Today we have a guest from USA, or it is Canada, or what is it?
It is Canada.
It is Canada. I'm
Yes,
sorry about that.
that is okay. I'm not
It's
one of those ones
nearby.
who jumps up and gets offended. It's all good. North America.
North America. Well, welcome to you, Kera Willis. I'm so glad you're here today, and we're going to hear a lot about you and your horses. So please tell us, how did you get into what you are doing and what are you doing today?
Well, thank you so much for having me. How did I get into what I'm doing? Well, when I was young, I mean, I think for a lot of us, the origin stories always go back to childhood because that's when the seeds were planted. And it wasn't that I wanted to be a rider. I just wanted to be animals when I was a little
Mm.
girl. First it was cats, and then it was goats. And then I discovered horses, and then there was no turning back. Like, oh my gosh, I could be this big and this powerful and move this fast, like with this incredible speed. And not only could I imagine myself into being them, but I could, I found my way into riding lessons and I could sit on their backs and like share in that like shapeshift feeling of like really being this incredibly powerful being so much more than myself. And so
Yeah.
that's what really planted the seed. And kind of went through riding lessons, worked in barns as a teenager, kind of, was at school and then worked a bunch of jobs and was basically living at the barn. I was one of those barn rat kids, and kind of skipped being a teenager in lieu of that apprenticeship. Like that was the world that I wanted. And so got in with some big trainers and really got a good solid foundation in just the like general practical English riding disciplines and how to put miles on a horse and trained a bunch of greenies up through the levels and got to dip into some of the Spanish style and the classical style dressage and kind of had some pretty incredible opportunities come my way because of that devotion. Um, but outside of that, have always also been an artist and a writer and following the line of the arts and the line of soul. And so eventually I kind of fell out of the conventional horse world and turned to the more healing arts sides of things. So did a certification in equine guided learning, dove really deep into therapeutic work specific for autism and ADHD.
Mhm.
I found myself constantly bumping into, um, and I like to say being mentored by people on the autism spectrum as to how to see the world differently. And so worked a lot in the classrooms and outside of classrooms as like support to different families and um, really wanted to take those kids out of the chair, so to speak, in a classroom and get them on the back of a horse. And so that really, really deeply informed my vision of what riding could be for. Instead of, competition, we were actually using this really ancient human practice and this really ancient relationship to help modern humans, if you will, feel
Mhm.
more embodied and more themselves and to help our nervous systems regulate and all of those things that we can dive into a little bit farther later. And then from there, really kind of, I started assembling herds and I started practicing this work with really whoever would come to me. And I sort of had a lot of families say, well, I know you do this work with autism, but will you teach my normal kid?
Mhm.
They really love horses.
Yeah.
Um, and so I started adapting the therapeutic framework and the therapeutic lens to then invite everybody in. Because we all need to learn how to belong and we all need to
Yeah.
learn how to be in our bodies and we all need that really beautiful healing element of nonverbal relationship, especially as our human society goes faster and faster and it
Mhm.
becomes more rattly with chaos and technology and all of those things. I found that being able to bring young people into nature through being on horseback, that really became the magic spot for me. And so I developed a business called Mountain Horse School, which is a name that I still work under that gave me the freedom and the room to kind of play with this idea. And so I spent 12 years full-time in-person programming, primary teacher, doing most of the stuff myself, like just playing and experimenting and seeing what worked. And had a lot of really different and special horses come to me who maybe couldn't fit into the world of humans in other ways, but that sparkly kind of really authentic interaction with kids was something that lit them up and gave them purpose. Um, and so spent 12 years like just that was all that I did. And it was such a great love. And I kind of came to the end of, sorry, this is a really long introduction, but I'll pause in a moment, I promise.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm listening.
Just giving you
Yeah.
the ground,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so I kind of found that I came to the end of that work. A lot of my horses were getting older and needing to do something less. They couldn't carry the bigger workload that the school was requiring of them. And I was finding that I was just aching for space to become more of an artist again. I'd kind of carried this vision as far as I felt it could go, and I was like, it's time for another shapeshift. And I really wanted to bring the way of teaching that I developed online so that I could teach other teachers what I had learned. And I found that there was no room to do that and also run a full-time school at the same time. Like there's just only so many hours in a day. And no matter how many staff you hire, something is always going to happen and you're going to be needed. And that's okay, right? But I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to have the freedom to like move into what I feel is being asked of me next if I don't kind of make a really big change. So I decided to close my physical school at the end of 2022. So I just have a couple of horses now, actually, out of that herd of 8 to 10 that I kept for years and years. I have just a small herd of two that's kind of the private backdrop of my life right now is kind of how I think of them. And I've been developing work online. So um, I launched this a big training called Ride for Joy. That's a 10 module certification, and it's a teacher's training for anyone who wants to help create, I call it the more beautiful world our hearts know is possible by bringing young people together with horses and nature. And so that is my great love and mission right now is growing that work. Um, and just kind of making some space to step into where that might lead. It feels like a new chapter. That is my very long-winded story.
Yeah, but very exciting. And I was thinking also, you said you have special horses, so you have not only special people, also special horses. And that's a great thing because, as you said, many times when we have riding schools, we have people who come and ride, and the horses get older and can't be in that space.
Mhm.
It's fantastic to have another purpose for the horse as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and I had some special little characters come through for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
tell
we
us
talked.
about it.
Yeah,
I'm
well,
I'm
so the
curious.
one that right, the one that comes to mind is a horse that I took on named Andy, who was this little Arabian, but really small, like maybe just 14 hands, like quite a little guy. And when he came, he looked like a 2 year old. Like his proportions were very much looked like a foal. And the story that he came with is that he had actually been a therapy horse for this little boy, and that he'd been trained to like lie down and put his head in people's laps. And I had tried to connect with his original trainer because I was like, I don't know what is up with this horse. Like, if I could have more of the story, that might be helpful. And I could never really track down those pieces of information. And he just he felt a little bit like a horse who hadn't quite been born, like he hadn't quite landed in himself. And so I actually spent almost 2 years. I put a bunch of my staff, one of my camp counselors kind of fell in love with him, and I was like, please ride this horse. Like, just take him out in the woods, take him out every day, like just put miles into him so that he's fit and he has muscle and he feels good in his body. I was like, I don't want to like try to teach him anything in his mind until he's really kind of incarnated here a little bit. And he was really anxious and he was kind of depressed, and like his eyes had that look behind them that he wasn't fully there. And I said, I just want him to move and I want him to like feel his own power. And I was lucky at that time. I didn't really need him to be useful at that
Mm.
point. I had other horses who were doing the teaching, and he'd been a gift. And I kind of took him because I was curious as to what he could be given the time. Um, and so he did a couple years of just like becoming in his body again. And then I started riding him, and I'm not a tiny person. I'm like almost 6 feet tall, and he's this tiny little horse. And I kind of started, I was like, is this okay for you? And he's like, yes, I'm strong now. Like he felt like he was ready. And so really just kind of because I have a dressage background, I tried to kind of, how do I explain this? Almost feel in him where the tension was so that I could let it move. I mean, that's kind of the principle of any kind of straightness training. We want to feel where the horse is holding against us and let it move. And so we did that for a long time. And then he was really safe on the ground, but he was very like easily triggered. He had that like Arabian
Mhm.
fire. So if anything happened under saddle, he'd be like, but I was like, intuitively, I was like, I feel like I want him to have that blessing of like kid energy. But how do I do it in a way that's safe? And so I literally hired one of my very dear friends, her first summer with me as camp counselor. She was literally the babysitter of this horse. So if he had a grown up beside him who was calm, we learned that he could kind of hold it together and be safe for the little person on his back. But if he didn't have that anchor, then he wasn't as safe. And so this was the way that we found for him to be involved in the work. Um, and he was still always quite sensitive and always quite responsive, and so never like a beginner horse. Like he was
Wow.
never going to be that. But this is the way that we had him able to be involved. And he actually kind of reached this turning point where his eye lit up, his whole posturing changed, his face looked different. And he took over the whole entire herd from my big 16 two-hand warm blood gelding. He became like head stallion, if you will, of my whole little crew in one afternoon. And so he had like the biggest transformation. Um, but he never was going to be a different horse. Like he was always going to have that fire. He was always going to have that little bit of reactivity. And so I ended up actually selling him to two of my students were looking for a horse together. And they really were becoming quite good riders and they'd fallen in love with him. And so I had the opportunity to let him go to those two girls. And I was like, this, I'm not going to find a better fit for a life for this horse.
Mhm.
So I kind of let him go, but it was quite an amazing process to be part of and a transformation to experience. Um,
Yeah, and it is difficult to part if you had a horse that long time and it's so special.
yeah.
So, but it's good when the ending is good.
Well, and I like to think like I've kind of made peace with it with thinking that we're their guardians and their custodians for a period of time. I find the whole concept of, and I mean I'm sure that you share this too in your heart, the whole concept of owning horses and owning land has always felt strange to me, like this claiming dominion over a thing. So I find if I think about it like stewardship or caretaking, that I'm just
Mhm.
passing that role to someone else then
Mhm.
who I feel is going to be beneficial.
Yeah, wow. And about your course, um,
Hmm.
is it for people who have a riding school who want to turn it around, or is it for beginners? Or tell us more
It's
about that.
yeah, so it's geared toward my main sort of target for the work is somebody who has a couple of horses in the backyard and, a good little foundation of their own experience, who has, pardon me, the neighbor's kids who are like, oh, we want to come ride your horses. And then somebody else down the road is, oh, we want to come ride your horses. And so it's for somebody who's like, I would like to offset my hay bills by doing a little bit of work with the horses that I have. How do I do that in a way that doesn't compromise my personal relationship with them? Um, and I've also had people who have come in who are running a riding school and who've been like, I just need another way of looking at this. It's too complicated. I feel like it's no longer aligned with who I want to be in the world or how I want to teach. Or people who are really looking for a way to bring a more heart-centered approach into their traditional work with horses, if you will. And so it's not for somebody to then take their regular riding school and call it a therapeutic center. Like I don't have the ability to put that stamp on them, if you will. We can't call it then therapeutic riding, but it's more how do we what I was really looking to do or hoping to do was to update the way that we teach, which so much derives from like the military model of training
Mm,
riders and horses. And it's like you stand in the middle of the ring and you shout. Um, and I feel like, it's 2025. Like kids are different than we
mm,
were when that model worked really well. Families are different. We might, nobody is riding 3 times a week. It's very, very rare that there's people who are that able to make that commitment. So it's more for people who want to design a week experience in the summer and really have an impact in terms of like planting seeds in a young person of what's possible between them and an animal, or even just different ways to look at the world that you don't see immediately that kind of come out later in life. Um, and I like to think about it like sort of seeding this idea of animals and nature being a sanctuary for our inner selves
mm,
and for maybe our truest relationships. Um, and that's not, we would never stand in front of a camp and say that out loud, right? That's not how we teach it, but that's what I really want to have come out in the experience. And
mm,
so what I'm offering is really for people and teachers who, maybe don't have a lot of experience and want a body of work that really answers what they feel in their heart. They've been looking out in the world and they're not seeing that model anywhere. Or people who have been in the field for a long time and they're like, we're kind of at the end of this road. Like the way that we've been doing things just needs to change, or it needs to like
mm.
realign with who I am. That's the people I'm hoping to reach.
And I have been talking to some who have riding schools and want to change.
Hmm.
And some of them say, yeah, but we can't tell the parents that the students are not going to ride because they're paying for riding.
Hmm.
So they come and have to ride their hours and go back again. But I
Hmm.
also talked to another person who had started doing this that you're talking about, and she said that we got more customers because not everybody is prepared to sit on a horse. They want to feel it and talk to it and
Hmm.
do all these things with the horse
Hmm.
without riding. So
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
And what I like the main components of the course, it is based on offering writing-based programming. But it's not like, for example, in a camp day, it would be like woven into this bigger ecosystem of experience. So they might actually sit on a horse for half an hour,
Mhm.
but the whole morning is spent with the horses. And then
Yeah.
the afternoon is woven from that place of connection with horses, then out into, well, how do we connect with the plants and the trees and the fields
Mm.
around us in a way that it feels like it's ours. Um, so a little bit of both worlds.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can imagine, as you said, kids are different today, and the adults as well, because we have gone from this military thing. I'm a bit older, so I have been through it all, and we all want to connect with the horse instead of just demanding it.
Hmm. Yeah, and the biggest thing I've heard from parents specifically, because they'll say it and kids will just be it. Like I find we get more feedback and dialogue from the older people.
Yeah.
And I was always teaching adult students as well. It just happened to be that I really focused in on the kid work. Is that we would always spend the very first session out in the field just talking about how do we know what they're feeling and what their bodies are telling us and what language are we communicating here
Mhm.
before anybody gets on the back of anybody else and starts
That's right.
to, you know, and that and the main feedback I got was like, oh my God, no one has ever told me this before. That like if the ear moves, it means something, and that if the head
Mhm.
moves, it means something. Um,
Yeah, and we think that now with the internet and everything that everybody who has horses knows about this, but no. If you
mm-mm.
talk to people, I have been talking to riding students that have been on a school with horses, and they don't know it.
Yeah,
And I asked them, what are you learning on the school? Yeah, we learn to ride. And I said, you can't handle a horse without knowing the language.
yeah. Yeah, it's like that's what the whole conversation is. Like
Yeah.
before you get into movement, before you get into um it's been really interesting. I have two students right now. I know I said I stopped teaching, but I have a couple here and there that I still um connect in with. And it's a woman who you know, has become a friend of mine and she grew up riding but never had that language piece of like, this is what's actually happening. Like, it was a lot of the mechanics of the instruction of pull
Mm,
this rein to do this. But it wasn't like, but then what's happening biomechanically and what's happening energetically and what's happening. And I'm finding that people are starting to be more open to like actually understanding what's going on between them and the
mm.
horses, which is really beautiful.
It is. It
Yeah.
is. And you have a whole other feeling inside, and it heals you as well yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the biggest part of that is because then you're taking time to feel. The more time you give for your horse to feel like they're heard, the more that kind of becomes this reciprocal loop where you suddenly start to feel and hear yourself more. It's like that there's this quote by this astrologer that I adore. It's just something she wrote in a blog that was the thing that you want, give it away. It's a
Mm-hmm.
woman named Chani Nicholas. And so the more that you give away that kind of deep listening to another being, like the more it kind of comes back to you and the more you can hear yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's where like that beautiful healing feedback loop of connection with horses and animals and trees and rivers and really any being we can give that kind of time to um, is very reciprocal. It's just so beautiful.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yeah. So, how long have you had this course? Is it new or how is it?
I launched the first, like the beta about a year ago, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a little group of three very brave students who jumped and said yes and dove into it with me. And so that was last spring we finished. And then I just finished another round before Christmas with, again, just a little group of two students. But it's been really amazing to just get to kind of swim through it again and like second draft all the material and kind of have a bit of a it's not that I didn't know what I was doing before, but I find that the second round just kind of lets you see it in a different way.
Mm.
The same
And
way
you
a
get
second round of a
questions also when you have,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, and
What?
like you kind of you need other people in the work to give you that feedback to know
Mm,
like is this landing? What do you need that isn't here? Like all of that it feels really good that it's like gotten out into the world.
that's right.
Um,
So
and
it is
so,
a digital course, but you
yeah,
are in it yourself. Do you meet them at
yeah,
Zoom or?
it's all live. I
Uh-huh.
feel like it might eventually not be entirely live, but I feel like if you're gonna teach online, that's such like a crucial way of making it immediate and felt and responsive. To me, it feels like that's important. um, or at least to have that opportunity. So I don't think I'll ever offer anything that's like fairly large and not have a live component.
No.
Um, and then so it's 10, well, nine 2-hour modules with like an opening and closing ceremony. And then there's a lot of supplemental material. So there's like videos and downloadable PDFs and like sample business plans and
Mm,
student handbooks and like kind of everything I developed over the 12 years of running a business that was useful to me that I was like, I'm going to then give this as part of this training as samples to other people, just to even just to pull language from. Like, how do I say this in a way that communicates? So much of like working with horses in this way is like it's like these invisibles of communication that we kind of don't have a lot of language for. We can name all the parts of a machine. We have a lot of language in English for like the right brain processes, but for the left, or sorry, other way around, for the left brain processes, but for the right, like artistic, nuanced, more feminine ways of knowing, like we don't have as many words. And so
mm,
I find part of what I found most valuable was just being able to collect all of the sentences I'd gathered over the years to try to describe these
mm,
invisibles and then be like, here's a way of languaging it. Like, don't copy it verbatim, make it yours, but like here is like all of the ways of saying that I have found over a really
mm.
a lifetime as a writer of ferreting away little scraps of language. So that's all
Because
part of
being with horses is feelings. And
it.
as you said, it's very difficult to describe it. How should you feel when you connect with a horse? Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a
And so
big one.
actually a big part of the training is also some little guided journeys and imagination exercises and just some somatic ways of becoming present in your own feet so that you as a teacher then have that as a resource. Whether you then give that to your students or not, it almost doesn't matter. But if you can really make yourself present, then you have the ability to share that just by osmosis and mentorship just by your own being. And then what you say matters less. Like it's not all riding on the words then. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
ideal. Yeah.
So you have two horses left. What is that kind of horses you have?
Yeah, what do I have? What am I doing? I actually have become part of this regenerative farm called White Crow, which is in the Columbia River watershed in BC. So it's this really huge river that kind of it's been dammed a lot. It's like part of big
Hmm.
hydroelectric power projects. But the little section that I'm on is still wild, so it floods every spring,
Mm,
and recedes throughout the summer. And so I found this little farm kind of perched on the hill above the river. And that's where my horses are and where I am. And so they've become part of a herd. My roommate and farm mate breeds. Um, Sheep and cows and guardian dogs and working dogs and he's got a bunch of gaited horses. And so my two horses and my little corgi dog have kind of just been absorbed as part of this ecosystem
hmm,
of our other critters. And so I have a black and white paint Frisian mare named
hmm.
Bessa, who's kind of my heart horse. She wasn't fully ever part of the school string. She's always just kind of been my riding mare.
Yeah.
Um, although we used to paint her a lot because she was black and white, so she made a great canvas. And then we would always do the bareback rides on her. So it was this real special thing where like everyone got to sit on, oh my gosh, the horse we never get to ride. Like,
Yeah.
so that was, so she has, done a little bit of the work with the kids. And she's actually in foal for the spring. So she's going to
Mm,
have a baby, which feels like a fresh, new, exciting beginning.
yeah.
Um, and then I have a black quarter horse mare who I actually haven't had for very long. She came from some rancher friends of mine when they just kind of needed her to go somewhere else. And she was pretty lame. One of her feet had been trimmed badly, and so she'd been
Hmm.
quite sore for some time and had some kind of deep-seated trauma over some training issues and stuff. So I took her as another project at the end. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm not going to take any more of these horses. And then I'd had
Ah, ah.
you know, we say these things. But I kind of felt like I owed her a bit of a debt. We had a ride together on we did this big backcountry ride on these big rolling grass canyon lands near the Fraser River years and years ago. And she taught me so much on that ride just because she was so sensitive and so reactive. I ended up just riding her just by touching the side of her neck. Like, go that way, go that way. And you could kind of, because she was a little bit claustrophobic, and so you could feel like the shiver of tension
Mm,
move through her body. And I'd be like, go that way, get out of here. And we'd move off. And so she taught like this finesse of like really feeling the energetic impulse of electrical energy move in the horse before it expressed through the physical body. Like
mm,
she taught me how to read that. Um, and just so much about how that impacts like nervous system regulation and trauma response and all of those things. Like it was like this giant textbook that this mare handed me on this ride. And so when she needed somewhere to go, I was like, I'll take her. Like, and I wasn't teaching kids at that point in time, so it wasn't like because she was so explosively reactive. Um, I hadn't wanted to take her in the beginning because she wasn't that safe to have around small people. And I was finally in a place I was like, I'm not actually actively teaching. I can take her now. So she has come to be part of my little herd. And her new name is Jet, and she's just kind of hanging out in the field. I've been working with her a bit, and she's turned into this lovely little trail mare. She'll always be sensitive,
mm,
um,
yeah.
definitely, but uh,
But the
she's much
the
happier in her body now.
the worst horses teach you most.
Yeah.
So when I say you're going to do that for the rest of your life, I'm just like you. And well, we have a little horse. It's like, I have to do this because you know
Yeah.
how to do it, and
Yeah,
you know
well,
it.
then it's
Yeah,
like, do you say no to the master when they arrive at your door? Like the next master teacher, oh no, go away, I don't want this.
you
Like,
don't.
so,
No,
yeah.
that's fantastic. So, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you and
Yeah.
learn these things?
Thank you. So I mostly live on the internet these days,
Yeah.
for the moment. Um, I might do a little bit of in-person teaching this year. I'm kind of open to pitches from people. I've been throwing around ideas of doing like little farm stays and like very, very intimate horse immersions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that is a possibility. I don't have anything formal up online or anything about that. That's just kind of a reach out to me and let me know what you'd be interested in, kind of a thing. Um, so I have a website, mountainhorseschool.com, is kind of where everything is. And then, of course, I'm on social media in a couple of places. So I'm Mountain Horse School on both Facebook and Instagram. And those are the best places to find the most up-to-date things. And then I'm trying to just kind of put a little something up there almost every day and just kind of create this tiny book of mini stories that lives in these spaces.
Mm.
And I also write on Substack. And that's where there's a few horse stories on there, but that's kind of where I've been courting the my sort of literary memoir writing self. That's where she lives. And so there's a lot of sort of personal essays about just really opening to that connection with nature and wild rivers and self-development and answering the call of wildlife and what wants to move through you. And so that all lives on Substack. And I write as 1,000 Names for Love on there. And I believe we'll be able to share all these links in the show notes or as part of the bio in case you're going, oh my gosh, how do I keep up? Um, And then I do have, if you wanted to jump on the website, I do have, it's called the Ride for Joy Mini. So I do have a free masterclass on there for anyone who's curious to know a little bit more about that. You can just put in your email and it will get sent to you right away. And that's kind of a really beautiful, it's got just an introduction to my way of working with horses, and it gives you a couple of really tangible skills to bring young people into that connection as well. And then there's just like a little guided journey at the end that's really my prayer for a more beautiful world. So I encourage everyone to check that out as well.
Mhm. Do you feel that people today are starting to turn around?
I feel like I feel like the people who have been turned around, how do I want to say this? I feel like it's almost like we've split into two different paths. And I don't know if it's just because of the polarity of the way that we have been pushed into these paths by the powers that be. And I'm not going to get into that too far because it's too much.
Mm.
Um, but um, and that's not what this podcast is for. But I feel like there's the people who have always wanted to know that this way of being is here, and there's the people who would be happy to just continue in the way that things have been done for the next 1,000 years.
Mm.
But I think that really where conversations like this and people like you and I who are trying to teach different ways of being in the world, there is, people who haven't come into the full funnel of these two paths yet. And so maybe they're in the middle
We can
and
catch them
you
there.
know, and we can
Yeah.
we can, you know, and again I like to think of it like I was saying with the kids where it's like we plant a seed that oh this kind of beauty, oh this kind of healing, oh this kind of magic is possible. And it's not that we can persuade anyone. I think
No.
that all we can do is be the example through the way that we're living our own lives and let
Mm.
that be the thing that ripples out. Um, and I think then that does have the potential to kind of turn the the whirlpool, maybe the way that we would like to see it go. I think this is maybe a really pivotal time for that too, which is part of why I was like, I need to have more conversations. Like I need like let's connect with more people in the world
Mm.
who are also working in this space.
Because I'm feeling that you are getting more peaceful if you are going that way in any way. Also, your work and everything, the people I work with, when they get into this thinking and listen more, listen to the horse, listen to the nature, you get like a whole uh, human being.
Yeah. And I I love that. It makes me think of that Temple Grandin book, Animals Make Us Human.
Mm.
Right. And I think that for so many thousands of years, we have evolved on the planet in partnership and in reciprocity and in deep relationship with more than the human.
Mm.
Right. And it's only in the last 100 years that we've been so, and so much so in the last 10 with technology. Like I find like more people spend more time looking at a screen than out a
Mm.
window.
Yeah.
Or, you look out most of the windows in the world and you only see another window of another building of another
Mm.
street. And I think that there's something that happens to us when we are placed in that small room of only human interaction where we lose like multitudes of ourselves.
Mm.
We might think in that very linear, rational, singular path that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, but there's whole concerts of other nuances of relationship and ways of being. And I think sometimes that we just lose those parts of ourselves when and we don't have that larger,
Mm.
I would almost say mirror, but that kind of feels a bit narcissistic, like that it's reflecting back to me. Like when
Yeah.
we don't have that's not what I want to mean. Like when we don't have that larger ecosystem to be part of that
Mm.
includes more than humans and more than horses and more than dogs. It's the bird that flew over the street and the seagull perched on the street light and the
Mm.
coyote that just trotted behind the dumpster. Like, um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. Is there anything more you'd like to say to people out there before
Hmm.
we caught up?
Yeah, I'm just feeling into that for a moment. I think I would like to offer everyone an invitation to, because sometimes we listen to podcasts and then we just go out and do what we were doing, or we finish our drive and we go into the next thing, right?
Yeah. Mm,
And pardon me, we heard it, but we didn't hear it with all of ourselves. It just kind of lives in a little compartment in our mind. And so I would like to invite everyone, or maybe challenge everyone, that instead of just rushing on to the next thing, to pause for a moment, um, and actually just behold where you are. And if you are in a place where you can see a tree or a plant or an animal, just take a few moments to actually look at that being in a way that recognizes that life and lets it be felt by you and lets it feel you. And maybe breathe there for a few moments and know
mm,
that that breath and that exchange happens in every moment, and we just rush by,
mm,
right? And so I invite everybody to just, it doesn't have to be grandiose. It doesn't have to be a meditation. It doesn't have to be a sit spot. It doesn't have to be a practice. Just take a moment,
mm,
right? And really behold something that is alive, that is around you, that is not a human. Behold the humans too. Humans are great.
mm.
But invite another being into the conversation of your daily life.
Great words. Yeah, so thank you so much for being here today. It has been a pleasure. And if you are out there wants to get in touch with Kera, you are very welcome.
Yes, please
And
do.
thank you so much for watching or listening to this podcast. And please subscribe so I can meet more people out in the world. I will pause a little before I go to do it, as Kara said. But please subscribe because it helps me to get out in the world and see more people. Thank you
Amazing.
for
Thank
today
you
and
so
thank you.
much for having me.
Thank you. Bye bye.